Today I'm going to be showing you exactly how we build our wooden truck boxes. We just picked up the Chevy 1500 a couple weeks ago. It's 2017, 8-foot long box. Let's get into it. So the first thing you want to do when you're building one of these truck boxes is establish your four corners. And so I pre-made these kind of before the video. I saved one for the demo, but kind of cut it out, shave it down, because these slots in the corner here, they don't fit a perfect 2x4, unfortunately. And I always found a 2x3, they're just not quite thick enough, especially for like building these boxes long term. But when you shave it down like this, they end up just sliding in. So something like that, a little bit of wiggle room so that when we get the boards on the side, you can kind of bend it in the way you need. Each truck is a little bit different with how kind of the sizing requirements and everything like that. And so it's a bit of a guide. I wouldn't follow this exactly, but at least you'll have a general idea of the measurements you need to take and so that you can build it on your own truck. So what you're wanting to do, this is the one that I saved for the demo here. We're doing 3 2x8s high. So that ends up being 21.75 inches tall. That's going to be above your box, okay? And then what you want to do is measure to the base of this kind of this slot here. So we end up with 6 3/4 plus 7.5. So that gives us 28.5. So that's going to be the length that we cut our board to. Yeah, 6 3/4. So that's going to be our depth that goes into these pockets. Okay. From there, what we want to do is measure the width of the pocket. You don't want to measure to this corner because the pocket actually, it's just a square pocket in there. So what we're going to do here is we're going to mark out 2 3/4. So after you have that measured out, this is now going to be the pocket that slides into there. You want to grab your jigsaw and your board here. So we're going to cut about 1 inch in, and then we're going to run a line down here. Go to put this in, it's actually a pretty good fit right there. If you need to, just take a chisel and whittle down the edges a little bit so that it slides into that pocket nicely, but you do want it to be fairly snug. I'll also mention, as we're putting them in, since we did prefab some of these, is that not every pocket is the same size. And so that's something you want to keep in mind as you're going around, is to measure each individual pocket. These two here are kind of the front and back pocket, but they're, 1/2 inch in different sizes. So we pre-stained all our boards here. These ones are 8 foot long. We just bought a 2x8x8. So these ones we didn't have to cut at all. And then over there for the back end piece, which we'll put in, we cut them just under 6 foot, essentially the width of the box. And so that will be our front cap near the window. So we're gonna be using a 3/8 carriage bolt, 3.5 inch. That's giving you enough to actually go through 2 2x4s, and then a little bit extra to throw, a washer, lock nut, lock washer. So with that, what you want to do is grab a 3/8 drill bit, grab your board, and start placing them on the side here. What we want to do is figure out where we're going to have this end board. So that's really important, so that when we put this, the end caps, we know how far back to put those first drill holes, because we can't move these, but we can shuffle this main board down. We're gonna also be putting some tool rack holders on this inside, so we don't want them to be pressed right up against this box edge, so that it allows our tools to actually go down a proper depth. This looks about right. We might slide it a little bit forward, somewhere in there. Just make sure that this is nice and level and square, and measure from the center of the board to the edge. So we're at about 6.5 here. That is going to allow us to put in 2 bolts per 2x8 here. We'll just put little markers just on the end so we have a reference for it. Since it's 7 1/4 across, it ends up being about 2.4 inches that we need to kind of find our centers on. You want to make sure that the drill is really nice and straight, otherwise you'll end up with crooked bolts. So now that we got our holes drilled, you'll want to grab 2 carriage bolts, and we're still going to need a drill on there, but you can kind of punch these through So we'll just let it sit pretty neutral. We'll slide this down to where we want this front cap to be. And this front cap will end up having to be slightly raised to kind of match that side, which is fine. So we'll make this more permanent down the line, but so make sure you throw a bolt in. Kind of locks that in place. And we'll throw a washer and a lock nut on there as well. If you come in really close here, you'll be able to see they actually have a bit of a square inside. So since there's not really anything that's going to be holding on this side, what we want to do is give that a really good whack, get it into the wood so that the wood acts as a bit of a kind of a wrench holding that in place when we go to tighten up that backside. So now this part becomes a little bit easier now that we have that first one set how we want it. So we'll come back to the second one, making sure that this guy is straight and level. You can kind of just eyeball it, honestly, because it's mainly for aesthetic that it's going to be in the center. We drilled those 2 pilot holes originally on kind of the back there, but once you kind of get into it, you can just do it right on the truck. So what I like to do is position all kind of the boards, and then we'll go around at the very end and tighten them all up at once. So the next step is to grab your leg bolts. Okay, this is what's going to drive in to that end plate, since there's not really a place to add a nut. So the same length as the main bolts, but they'll just be driving directly into the board. We're going to want to measure out the same distance just because it's aesthetically pleasing if we can kind of match up those bolts as we go up. We switched out this drill bit, so this is a 5/16 for the 3/8 leg bolt. Is just drive a pilot hole through so that it actually has something to grab onto. It ideally shouldn't split the board. It does occasionally, but again, there's not a lot of pressure on this, so it's not the end of the world. And then we'll go, and we got a 14 mil socket, throw that on there, throw a washer on. Keeping in mind a 2x4 is really only 1.5 inches, so you're only going to want to go about 3/4 of an inch into that board there, right around there. But you want to be holding that up when you drill into your pilot holes so that they actually line up. Let's grab these shavings from earlier and stick it under there. And then that kind of helps us get the height there. Make sure you put a flat washer on before you start drilling it in, otherwise you're going to have to take it out to do it. So this one is a little bit more permanent than just the carriage bolts, as this one will be staying where it is. So get it going in, and it'll find that pilot hole and kind of pull it to where it needs to be. Kind of want to leave a little bit out there so that it's holding it in place, but when we drill the second one in here, it allows you a little bit of room to move it around. This is where you can tighten them up. So I typically find, since each piece of wood is a little bit different, you're not going to find like really a torque spec for it. But as soon as the washer starts getting pulled into the wood, that's usually worked out. And again, you're wanting to do these kind of at the same time, as since they're both screws, one will be pulling against the other. So kind of small increments between both of them. And there. Didn't get too much, no splitting there, which is great. Nice and flush at the end. And this piece is practically done. So the process is the exact same for the second layer. So we're not going to have any gap. That way, when we're really stuffing this full of debris, none is going to spill through. So we're just going to set it right directly on top. This end is the most important to have squared off. So if your cuts are a little bit off, this is the side you want, as we're going to be putting a front board on here. Whereas the back, we're just going to add a slide-in board so that you can really take advantage of all the room in your box. So we just want to make sure that that's nice and straightened out. Whereas if we do the middle one, this end one can be a little bit harder to adjust at the end. So when you're doing your second board at the front near the cab, you might find it seems like you cut it too short, but these boards can sometimes bow in a little bit. So line up the top and kind of hold it, putting pressure over there, and then pry this back so you can slide it in, okay? And there might end up being a small gap in between these two boards, but what you really want is a nice flush top. Okay, so now that we got all the boards on, go around and put all the nuts, washers, and lock washers on all the bolts around, and that'll suck everything together. One of the final pieces that I really love doing on these box builds is building this sliding backboard. Using this 1/2 inch sheet of plywood, we're gonna throw a couple handles in it, and then you'll be able to slide it in and out, and essentially then you're gonna be able to fill right up to the top of this with debris or whatever you want, your junk, whatever you're hauling. What we want to start by doing, measuring from one side, kind of the inside pillar here, and you want to give yourself a little bit of grace. You don't want to necessarily be fighting to take this out. We're sitting at 67 1/4 end to end. From there, we might have to skim off a little bit, but for the most part, it should just slide in and out with ease. What I'm also going to do is measure the front, because that's also where we're going to be storing it when it's not in use. If you have a 3-foot square, it'd be perfect for this. We just have a simple ruler, so that's what we're going to use. Alright, so we're going to rip this just with a circular saw. This board here, when it comes down, it needs to now bypass over this and get over this hump as well here. Kind of eye it up with the bottom where it's going to be sticking out the most. So we'll aim for 5 3/4 on each side. So decide which side you want to be your top, and then we're going to measure from the base of the truck here to this edge, 22 1/4. To put a little bit of a round edge on this. And this is where you're going to want to take your jigsaw. We're going to do the exact same thing on the other side, flip it around. You can use the old piece here as a template, so you can just get the exact same cut. So now that we got both bottoms kind of cut out on each side, slide it in. We've got those end caps on here to hold it in. But as you can see, we also need to take off a couple inches off the top here, just so that it's sitting nice and flush with this. So we just cut these end pieces out of a 2x3, and we're just going to throw it on the end, and that will just help to kind of create that nook there. Or it just slides in nice. We've got the top all leveled out. Again, this should be, have some play in it. We're going to throw some handles in right now so you can easily grab it. So we have this other board from one of our other trucks, so we're just going to lay it on top, and then we'll have kind of the outlines. So we're just going to trace them, but so you have a reference. We did them 5 inches across and 2 1/4, I'd say, high. Yeah, so 5 inches and 2 1/4. Most of the time you're working, you got some gloves on. You're not fighting to get your hands in there. It's a big enough hole. Perfect. So the best part about this backboard is that it's removable. So if you're not using it to you know, fill your truck right full, you can pop it out, store it in this front area, and it'll kind of stay there so you can use your entire box until you need to really stuff it full.